All right, so the next section we're going to cover is section 5.3. You'll notice we actually skipped 5.2. That's because 5.2 really just deals with more content from 5.1. And I kind of wanted to skip that and get into actually solving trig equations. In the next section, we'll probably revisit some stuff from 5.2 and extend it a little bit further. But I wanted to get straight into solving. So really the goal in section 5.3 is to be able to solve different trig equations. We'll look at a few different types of examples today, but again, I can't really show you every single equation you'll ever come across. So just keep in mind that what you learn today will not necessarily cover everything. You should be able to take what you learn and extend it to other problems. So let's just go ahead and maybe we'll start with one that's a little bit more straightforward, just so that we can kind of see what the idea is in these problems. But we'll start off with, I'll call them linear trig equations, meaning there's no squareds, there's no factoring. It's just kind of your more basic ones. It doesn't mean easy necessarily, but they are a little less complicated. So we'll just go ahead and say solve for x. And we'll do a couple of these. So we'll do 2 cosine of x plus the square root of 3 equals 0 to start with. All right, so keep in mind we're trying to solve for x. So this is really going to work out similarly to what you know about solving equations. We'll subtract the square root of 3 from both sides. We'll divide by the 2. Notice I'm dropping the parentheses on the x. It just kind of gets tedious to keep writing it over and over and over again. But notice it still is cosine of x. It's just implied. So at this point, you really need to use cosine inverse, although I believe this value is on the unit circle. We'll go ahead and use inverse just to get used to that. So at this point, you'd say, well, it's cosine inverse of negative root 3 over 2. And you could plug that into a calculator. And we're going to stick with degrees in this case. So if I stick that into the calculator, I get 150 degrees. And so really that is the answer. X is 150 degrees. If you were to look on your unit circle, you'd see that there's a point over here and it's negative root 3 over 2 and 1/2. Now this is going back to inverses, which we looked at a few days ago. And you might remember that there's also a point over here that works, negative root 3 over 2, negative 1/2. This one is at negative 150 degrees. So I'm going to change my statement up here just a little bit. I want to make sure you understand that this is the answer, but I'm going to say round to the nearest tenth of a degree, and also all solutions in the interval from 0 to 360. So we found one solution. If you go back to the rules from inverse, you might remember that cosine gives you plus or minus, which we just showed over here. But that negative 150 is not in the interval I want. So in order to find a coterminal angle with negative 150, I can just add 360 degrees to that, and I would end up with 210. I noticed some of you had some alternate methods to this, which is fine. You used the reference angle, which also works. You could do 180 minus 30 and 180 plus 30. I've just found that it's kind of simpler if I write down those rules and follow the rules in getting these answers. So then my final solution would be 150 or x is 210 degrees. So I have two answers in this case. You could always go back and double check. So you could plug back into our original equation. It was 2 cosine of 150 degrees plus the square root of 3, and that should equal 0. Just double check, yep. And then also 2 cosine of 210 degrees plus the square root of 3 should equal 0. Okay. Let's try another one. That one was pretty straightforward, hopefully. This one will have to do a little bit more work, but it's still going to be a linear equation. So let's do 2 tangent of x minus 1 equals negative tangent of x minus 2. Okay, so notice the tangents are on either side of the equation. So we're going to do kind of the classic move here that I'm sure you remember from when you've solved linear equations in the past. We're going to move the tangent of x over here, and I'm going to move that 1 to the other side. So what I end up with is 3 tangent of x, and negative 2 plus 1 will give me negative 1, which means tangent of x is negative 1/3. Now comes kind of the crucial step. We have to take the inverse tangent of both sides. And then I get my answer. And now we're back into inverse from section 4.7. So you can go back and review section 4.7 if you want. So my answer would end up being about 18.4 degrees. With a negative in front. Whoops. Oh boy. All right, so this is my first solution. If I add 180 to this, I get my other solution, 161.6. But keep in mind, I want all answers from 0 to 360, and this negative 18 is not, so we're going to add 360 degrees to that. And so then my final answer will be 341.6, so I get that x is approximately 161.6 or 341.6 degrees, and those are my two solutions. Okay, the last one I want to do, hopefully this hasn't been too taxing and it's kind of made sense. The last one I want to do involves a reciprocal function. So we're going to do 2 cosecant of x plus 4 equals 0. So we'll start off the same way. We'll subtract 4 and divide by 3. So I end up with cosecant of x equals negative 4/3. Now if you look on your calculator, you don't have a cosecant inverse. So that means that we have to use the fact that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, which means if I just sort of take the reciprocal of both sides, so flipping both sides essentially, or I guess you could multiply the sine of x and then, well, there's different ways to do it. I would just take the reciprocal of both sides, and so then I would end up with sine of x equals negative 3/4. Now we're back into our regular situation. We can take sine inverse of both sides, and I end up with negative 3/4. I need the sine inverse of that. So I get about negative 48.6. And then in order to find the other one, we take the supplement of that. So I'm going to do 180 minus that one. And I get 228.6. Negative 48.6 is not in the correct range, so we're going to do this. Stand by. Let's do this on the calculator real quick. Okay, so I get 311.4. Whoops. So x is approximately 228.6 degrees, or x is approximately 311.4 degrees. All right, and so those are our two answers. So in this video, we talked about just kind of solving in general what that looks like, but in particular, we did linear equations. We solved linear trig equations. In the next one, we'll do some quadratic equations.